Foundation with love.
With love.
Okay. Mrs. Obama, this bouquet is from our Children's Foundation with love.
Whoa. Hey. Harlem. Man. Now this is what I'm talking about, right? This is how you all do it in Harlem, right? It is so good to be here. I have been looking forward to this day for months. Thank you all so much for being here and for withstanding this heat. I love you so much. I want to start by thanking our host, Sam Brown, and our Children's Foundation. This is a wonderful facility, beautiful children. Thank you for hosting us here. I want to thank Tamara, a beautiful lady, for that wonderful introduction. We have a lot of mutual friends. It's so good to see you. You know, you see her face, like, I know her. I know her because she's everywhere. And I don't want to forget our councilwoman, Helen Foster. I like first, right? First African-American female elected official to endorse a candidate. Our candidate, Barack Obama. Phenomenal. And I know that there are some other elected officials here. I don't want to name anybody, but if you're an elected official and you're here, please raise your hand. Thank you for being here.
We have State Senator Bill Perkins and the first black male to endorse Obama, and we have council member, Assembly member Michael Benjamin. Anyone else?
And last but not least, Ms. Pam here. Thank you so much. Thank you, sweetie. Thank you. Well, I have been traveling around the country for my husband, Barack Obama, because we are going to get him elected to be the President of the United States. Isn't that something? And as I travel around the country, what people are most interested in, first of all, they want to know how we're doing. Because thank God we have so many people who are praying for us, who are looking after our girls, who are thinking about us as a family. And what I tell people is that we are great. We are handling this fine. Our girls are phenomenal. One of the things Barack and I committed to when we got into this race was that we were going to put our children first. Because if we wanted to model what good family was about, we'd have to do it at home. I say this all the time. You got to look to a person's character and what they do in their own house to determine what kind of leader they're going to be. That's why I married Barack Obama, because his first concern is about his home and how we're balancing. So the girls live a wonderful life. They're at camp, they're doing the things little kids do. Sometimes they join us on the road. Most of the times they don't want to be bothered. And when they want to come, they come, and when they don't want to be bothered, they go on about their merry way. So they are doing just fine, and we are holding up as a family. One of the things that I'm doing, I cut back my schedule. I'm really at 20% now in my job that pays for my health care, as I tell people. But I've done that primarily not just to be on the campaign road, but I am the parent, and I do day trips. So today, New York being here, I get up in the morning, get the kids off to the neighbors, get on a plane, come here, do 2-3 events, get on the plane, get home by bedtime. So in that way, my girls say, well, I don't know where mom went today, but she was home. And that's critical for us to do, and we can handle that because we're grown-ups in this relationship. So we are doing just fine. The other thing that people want to know from us that I try to share is who we are as people. And I don't mean talking about our resumes, because Tamara did an excellent job of laying out what I've accomplished in my life. And you can read Barack's book, not a plug, and find out what he's done in his life. But what I try to do is to share who we are as a family, our values, how we were raised, our upbringing, what makes us tick, what keeps us grounded. Because I think that in the end, this campaign is going to be decided on people's ability to feel like they can connect with the candidates and feel like at some level they can identify with who we are as people and that we're somebody that they can trust and that our value system is solid. So we're an open book because you need to understand who we are to know whether we can lead you to the next phase that this country needs to be. And so I talk about myself, tell people about my background, and Tamara mentioned a bit about that, but I am a South Side girl from Chicago. I like that. And that's who I am, that's who I've been, that's who I will continue to be. I grew up in a working class community. My father was a stationary fireman, worked at the city his whole life. Blue collar worker. My mother stayed at home until I went to high school. My brother and I were products of the Chicago public school system, proud products. Now my parents snatched him out before high school because he was a basketball player. Wanted to make sure he was going to get an education and get a little discipline, so they sent him to a Catholic school. And that decision paid off because it was my brother who was the first of our family to gain admission to Princeton. And the truth of the matter is that going to Princeton, seeing him go, was my first exposure to knowing that that was something that I could reach for. There's nobody who told me that I could go to Princeton. I was number 30 in a class of I don't know how many people. We didn't have resources, didn't have counselors, didn't have people who were pushing us to dream and to reach. And I saw my brother. And I thought, well, shoot, I'm as smart as he is. If he can get in, I certainly can get in. But that's important for us to realize that in order for our children to even understand their potential, they have to see their possibilities, and that was extremely true for me. Extremely true for me. So I thank my brother every day for offering me that vision of what I could be. I talk a lot about my family because I think back on just how impossible or improbable it was for my father to put not one but two kids through Princeton on a blue-collar salary. And then I took it for granted. I thought, thank God, Dad's doing something. I don't know what he's doing, but tuition got paid, right? But now that I'm an adult, I marvel at what they saw for us and the investment that they made. How did they know that this was going to pay off, right? How many of us have been in that position? So when I think about who I am, I think about my parents and their struggle. And to top it off, my father had MS. He was a man that went from being a vibrant, working, running, boxing, swimming man to a man who couldn't walk without the assistance of a cane and then a walker, and eventually died from complications of MS after a year before I got married. But the thing I remember most about my father is that he got up and went to work every day. He didn't complain. He wasn't late. He pushed to do his very best for our family every single day. And when I tell people about who I am, what motivates me, it's the voice of my father who is in my head. And I am constantly trying to make sure that I am making him proud. What would my father think of the choices that I make, how I led my life, what careers I chose, what man I married? That's the voice in my head that keeps me whole and keeps me grounded and keeps me the girl from the south side of Chicago, no matter how many cameras are in the room, how many autographs people want, how big we get. The bottom line is that what drives me is that foundation that was laid by my parents. And then I met this man, Barack Obama. And my family swore I would never find a man that would put up with me. That was the prediction in my household. So they were all like, Barack, it's good to see you, man. You're in for it. But like many people who first meet Barack Obama, I had, the same kind of funny impressions. Who's this guy, right? I was a first-year law associate at my firm, Sidley & Austin, and Barack was a first-year associate at Harvard. He was first-year student. And he was hired as a summer associate. I remember it's clear as day, this hot shot, first year Harvard law student, black guy. Everybody was all impressed. And of course I thought, well, this is just a black man that can talk straight. That's why everybody's excited. So I was like, let me lower my expectations because, you know, he's probably not all that. And then I found out that he grew up in Hawaii. I thought, oh, my goodness. Never met a black man who grew up in Hawaii. His name was Barack Obama. I thought, this guy's got to be weird, right? And then they assigned me to be his advisor. And I thought, oh man, I'm going to be stuck with this nerd for the entire summer. It's my attitude, right? I made assumptions like everybody does. Who's Barack Obama? He's got to be funny. Was he from some other country, from a different religion? We put up labels and all that. Well, the first day I met him, first of all, ladies, he was cute. So that helped. I was like, all right, he's cute. I like that. All right, we can talk. And then I had to take him to lunch on that first day, and we talked. And I found out who he was again, not his resume, but I found out who he was, how he was raised, and I found out, yes, he came from a biracial family, but it was a strong, hard-working, middle-class background. His grandmother was the primary breadwinner in his household. You know, that he saw his grandparents sacrifice to give he and his sister opportunities that they would never have. His mother, a very young, very single parent, was trying to get her PhD across continents. She was studying in Indonesia, which is why he got exposed to Indonesia. And he was back in the States trying to get an education. And his reaction to what he saw in his life, the struggle, the sacrifice, seeing the world around him, seeing real heartache and pain in third world countries, his reaction was the same as mine, this belief that I owe something. I am blessed. And for my blessings, I have an obligation to use my skills and gifts to do more than just help myself. So not only did he have this belief, but he put it into action. So after college, instead of doing what a lot of us did, you go out and make much money as you can for as long as you could. He became a community organizer, working in churches on the south side of Chicago for years. I was impressed with that, because I met a lot of brothers, talked a good game, but I met very few who actually put their principles into action and was living life in a way that showed his values. And I knew then and there I would like this brother. I could respect him, but when I found out that I could love him was when I actually saw him in his element. He was still, although he was at Harvard and working at a law firm, he was still working with those churches. He took me to a training. Church basement, smaller than this, hotter than this. You can believe that. Mostly single parents, mothers, grandparents raising grandchildren out in Altgeld Gardens. And they were there because they wanted the simple things that we all wanted. They wanted a better life for themselves and their children. They wanted safe streets, basic stuff, clean environment. They wanted decent schools. They wanted jobs that paid a living wage. And they were there as ordinary people because they believed that they couldn't count on government anymore, that they needed to take action. So Barack was there as an organizer, and he walked in that room just as confident and calm. He rolled up his sleeves, and he launched into what for me was the most eloquent discussion of what he called the world as it is and the world as it should be, and how our job as people, as ordinary people, is to try to narrow the gap between those two ideas, because we get cynical and afraid that the world as it is, this nasty, broken, divisive world, is all that we can hope for. But we know better. We know what the world should be like. We know what fairness looks like. We know what real opportunity looks like for children all over this country. We know the difference, but we can narrow the gap. And that's when I fell in love with him. I said, this brother is for real. There was an authenticity that you see, that you're connecting with. It's real. And I say that to people, and I am so passionate out here because what I tell people, I am married to the answer. And I'm not just saying that because I'm his wife. Because as his wife, let me tell you, the sensible wife would say, brother, don't do this. This just is not healthy. Go teach, go be a lawyer, go do something else. But see, the thing that I know, and this is an interesting test for us, is that I know what people have said that what they want. They want honesty. They want truthfulness. They want someone who has experience. And let me tell you, let's just talk about experience for a moment. Because the thing that is the most interesting in this race is for people who say that Barack Obama is not experienced. And I can't wrap my head around that because there is no other place in this world where a man with the credentials of Barack Obama would be called inexperienced, all right? Barack is the only candidate in this race who has worked on the ground with people as an organizer. You name me one other candidate that has organized in the community. Name me one other candidate who has been a civil rights attorney. Name me one other candidate who's been a constitutional law scholar at the University of Chicago. Name me one candidate who has been the first African-American president of the Harvard Law Review. Do you know what that means? Do you know what that means? The only candidate who has worked at the state level, he's worked on improving health care in the state of Illinois. And trust me, people, Illinois doesn't play. Chicago politics is mean. And Barack is a respected leader in our state. The same arguments that people are making in this race to try and sway people were made back in the U.S. Senate race. People said, oh, there's no way he can raise that money. You know, there are people who are just billionaires who ran in the race against him in the U.S. Senate race, right? There were people who said, oh, there's no way he can build a political machine that could outmuscle the dynasties that were running in the U.S. Senate race. There were people that said, oh, there's no way that people in downstate Illinois would vote for a guy named Barack Obama. They said all of that. So when people ask me, well, what's the most interesting thing about this race? Nothing surprises me. We've seen it. And what happened in Illinois, which will happen here, is that Barack Obama won his seat by 70% of the vote statewide. And he won everything. He won women. He won working class black folks. He won working class white folks. He won the ethnic population. He won up and down that state from the urban north to the rural south. And he won it because he had a message of common sense and decency and connection. Because he said, you know what? It's enough of this divisiveness. I am tired of people talking about what we can't do. I'm tired of people telling us who we have to be afraid of and distracting us from our own self-interest. That we can come together as a people around some basic common sense principles. That we can do that. Now the question, people, and women, we are at the center of this debate, which is why we have Women for Obama, because in the end, when stuff works right, women do it. Let's say that one more time. When stuff works right, we know a good thing when we see it, and we know in our gut when something doesn't feel right. Now, I am here, ladies, because I'm a woman. I'm a professional. I'm a citizen of this country. I'm a mother. And like many of you, I am so tired and upset and disturbed by the direction that our country is going. And there's so much that we have left to do. And we as women have to be at the lead on this one. We can't play into these games because we have this window of opportunity. We have this window of opportunity where a man like Barack Obama, who is not only gifted and honest and decent like my father, but he's somebody who's willing to put himself out there on behalf of people, not just some of the people, but all of the people. At every turn, Barack Obama has been a man who has lived not for power, but for principle. And that is not something that you see every day. So what I say to people, when people ask me, is he ready to lead? Yes, he's ready to lead. The question is Are you ready? Are you ready? That will be the test of this race. Will you move out of fear, or will you move out of possibility? Because one of the reasons we got in this race, there were a lot of reasons not to, a lot of things to be afraid of. But one thing I'm trying to teach my children, you don't make decisions based on fear. You don't make decisions based on fear. And we are going to need you. We've come 80% of the way. We've made sacrifices that we are happy to make because we are truly blessed. We've come 80% of the way. The other 20% is up to you. Because what they are counting on is for us not caring. Stay at home, watch the TV, just don't worry about it, don't pay attention. We'll tell you what to think and how to think it. That's what they want. But when you organize at the grass levels, when you start talking in communities, you start raising dollars, $20, $50, not starting at $2,300. You buy people into the process. You let them know that there's a seat at the table. We have got to grasp our chairs at the table. And I am passionate about this because I am confident that we can change the direction of this country. What I say is $20 in this race means the same as $2,300 if you vote. If you vote. And that's just not talking about voting. That's voting. That's registering the vote. That's getting Uncle whoever up out of the chair. That's talking to the nieces and nephews who are old enough to vote. What's going to make the difference in this race is that they are not counting the voiceless to stand up. They're not counting them. So don't pay attention to the polls, because the polls are only counting the people who are already in the game, people who already play. But what we're counting on is a whole new level of energy. Folks waking up out of their slumber going, no more, no more. I am in this. I am in this to stay. And we need women at our core. And we need you here in Harlem. We need you here in New York City, because we can't be everywhere. We got Iowa, the early states, all this. It's all a complicated game, right? But if people are operating on the ground and this energy is building and it's building and it's building, then not only will we elect Barack Obama to the President of the United States, we are going to make some amazing change in this country. We want your help. Thank you, Harlem. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. That's all right. You're going to have some time now. Let me thank Charlie King, Dr. Richardson. Most of all, let me thank Reverend Al Sharpton for bringing us all here together today in the Urban Action Network. I am proud to be a candidate for the presidency of the United States of America. But I am mindful that I wouldn't be here if it had not been for Reverend Al Sharpton running for president, and Carol Moseley Brown running for president, and Jesse Jackson running for president, and Shirley Chisholm running for president. They paved the way, and I stand on their shoulders. And I'm proud to acknowledge that debt that I owe. I appreciate Reverend Sharpton for being a voice for the voiceless and a champion for the dispossessed. And as we saw last week, he's still on the front lines, fighting a good fight. And we are thankful for his energy and his willingness to challenge the conventional wisdom. I'm also thankful that Reverend Sharpton has built this organization because what he understands is that change in America doesn't happen from the top down. Change happens from the bottom up. Change happens when millions of voices set the agenda and hold those in power accountable to move that agenda forward. And that's why I'm so proud to have an opportunity to address all of you here today. And I congratulate all the grassroots activists, all the folks in the neighborhoods on a day-in, day-out basis who are knocking on doors and making phone calls and standing on picket lines and stirring things up. Because without that activism at the local level, we're not going to bring about any change at the national level. And the reason that I'm particularly appreciative of Reverend Sharpton's building this organization and recognizing the change comes from the bottom up is because that's how I've lived my life. That has been the principle around which I have entered into politics. Some of y'all don't know that I actually used to live in New York City. I went to Columbia University. And got my hair cut uptown.
There we go.
Went to church once in a while uptown. Did some organizing at city colleges up on Amsterdam Avenue. And when I got out of college, I realized that I wanted to be a part of something larger. I had been inspired by the civil rights movement. I remembered those young people. Straight back, eyes clear, sitting at the lunch counters and marching on behalf of their freedom. And I had been too young to participate in that, but I was reminded that the opportunities that I had benefited from had derived from the efforts of those young people. And so I'd become active in the anti-apartheid movement on my college campuses, and then decided that's how I wanted to spend my time. And so I wrote to every organization around the country that might be willing to hire somebody out of school. And I got to admit that most of the organizations here in New York didn't reply to my inquiries, and I'm not sure I could have afforded to live in New York anyway on a community organizer's salary, but there were a group of churches on the south side of Chicago that had come together to deal with the devastation of steel plants that had closed all across the region. Tens of thousands of people had been laid off, black, white, Hispanic. Homes had been foreclosed, commercial strips had deteriorated. And so these churches, recognizing that it wasn't enough just to pray, decided to take action. They came together and gathered up the little money they had and formed an organization, and since they didn't have enough money, the only person they could afford to hire was me. So they gave me, I still remember, they gave me $13,000 a year and some car expenses. And so I bought a little raggedy car and I drove out from New York City to Chicago, didn't know a soul. And for the next 3 years, I worked with these churches to set up job training programs for the unemployed and after-school programs for youth, and try to bring city services into communities that had been neglected. And I've always said to people that was the best education that I ever had, because what it taught me was that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they're given an opportunity to shape the direction of their lives. Now, after 3 years, I went back to law school, got my law degree. And there's something humming down here. That's somebody's BlackBerry.
Watch out.
That's Sharpton's BlackBerry. Is that Hillary calling? I was just checking. breaking my flow. Russ says it was my wife. She told me what groceries I got to bring home tonight. All right, where was I? I was in law school. Southside, $13,000, went to law school, came back. And because I had done well in law school, I had an option to go to some of the Wall Street firms and make a lot of money, but I decided I still believed in that principle of working at the grassroots level. So I spent the first year out of law school organizing a voter registration drive and registering 150,000 new voters to help Democrats get elected in 1992. And then I started a civil rights practice, and I represented people who didn't have a voice, represented folks who had been discriminated against on the job, African Americans and Hispanics and women, represented African Americans whose votes had not been properly counted and who did not have an opportunity to meaningfully participate in the political process. I started teaching constitutional law, seminars on race and the law at the University of Chicago Law School. And after a few years, a Senate seat where I lived opened up. And some people asked me, because they knew of my community activism, whether I'd be interested in running for the state Senate. And I did what every wise man does under such circumstances. I prayed on it, and I asked my wife. Amen. And after consulting those two higher powers, I did what every first-time candidate does, which is I talked to every person who would listen to me. So I'd go around and I'd go to the PTA meetings and I'd go to the block parties, I'd go to the barber shops and beauty shops, and everywhere I went I'd hand out literature and folks would look at it and they'd say, so you're running for Senate. They'd have two questions for me. First question, where did you get this funny name Barack Obama? Although they wouldn't say it right, and they'd call me Alabama. Or they'd call me Yo Mama. And I'd have to explain my name's Obama. And my father was from Kenya, from Africa, which is where I got the name from. And then my mother was from Kansas, which is where I got my accent from. But the second question bears on today. Because the second question people would ask is, you seem like a nice young man. You've got a fancy law degree, could be making a lot of money. You teach at a fine law school. You got a beautiful family, church-going man. Why would you want to go into something dirty and nasty like politics? Why would you want to go into politics? And the question is understandable because at some level, all of us feel cynical about the political process. Even those of us who are involved in it feel cynical about it because we get a sense that politics has become a business and not a mission. That power, especially in Washington, is always trumping principle. That we've got a lot of leaders who are long on rhetoric but short on follow-through. And so over time, we get discouraged. Over time, we start feeling as if what happens in the public arena doesn't really make much of a difference. Maybe every 2 years, every 4 years, we vote, we hold our noses, choose the lesser of two evils. But we don't really have confidence that government is going to make a meaningful difference in our lives. At most, we hope that it does us no harm. But what I said to people in that first race, and the same thing that I've said in this political campaign, this presidential campaign, is that there's always been another tradition of politics. There's been a tradition that says that we're all connected as a people, that we've got a stake in each other. As I said at the 2004 convention, if there's a child in Harlem that can't read, that makes a difference in my life, even if it's not my child. If there is a veteran in Chicago that is foraging through a dumpster because he's homeless, because he didn't get the proper services that he needed after serving this country, that diminishes all of our patriotism. That basic notion that I am my brother's keeper, that I am my sister's keeper, that is part of what has built up America at every stage. We like to talk about our self-reliance and our individualism, and that's a good thing. But what we have to also talk about is the notion that we're one community, that we've got some ties to bind us together, that we can't rise up if some of us are still down. And it's that principle that got me into politics in the first place, and that's the reason that I'm running for the presidency. Now, Reverend Al mentioned that he and I have had some conversations. And one of the things that I have said to Reverend Sharpton is that I absolutely agree that I should not get the support of the African American community simply because I'm African American. I don't believe in that. That is not what America is about. If I get support from the African American community or the white community or the Hispanic community, I don't want it to be because of my status or what I look like. I want it to be because of what I've done and how I've lived and the principles I stand for and the ideas that I promote. And that's why when I come before the Urban Action Network, I want people to focus on those things. Where I've been, what I've done, how I've operated. Because the fact of the matter is that I have not just walked the walk. I have not just talked the talk. I have walked the walk throughout my life. You know, these issues that the Urban Action Network talks about. National. Action Network talks about. They are not just the issues of a campaign. They're the causes of my life. At every juncture, they're the things that I've worked on. So let's talk about some of those issues. We know that we've got a healthcare system that's broken, that's bankrupting families and bankrupting communities. We know that it's affecting all of America, but we also know that it is particularly hitting hard on African American and Latino communities. We know the statistics. We know that 2/3 of the folks who don't have health insurance in this country work every day. Some of them work 2 jobs and still don't have health insurance. Now, during the presidential campaign, everybody's going to come up with a proposal to provide health insurance to every single person. But let me tell you what I did when I was in the Illinois Senate. Let me talk about how I provided health insurance to thousands of children who didn't have health insurance. How I helped to bring Democrats and Republicans together to provide health insurance to parents of children who did not have health insurance. I can talk about how I fought against insurance companies who were price gouging the uninsured, charging them more than folks who had health insurance, and how we helped to work to reverse that. I can talk about how we worked together to reduce the price of prescription drug for senior citizens in Illinois. I don't just talk about it, I've done it. Everybody talks about the criminal justice system and how it has not always treated people throughout America equally. Well, I don't have to just present a proposal about what I'm going to do, Reverend. I will talk about what I've already done. In the Illinois legislature, I passed the first in the nation law requiring videotaping of interrogations and confessions in capital cases so we wouldn't have 13 innocent men on death row in Illinois. I passed the first law requiring that we monitor racial profiling in Illinois, prohibiting the practice. I don't just propose, I've actually done those things. I know that everybody here is concerned about ex-offenders. We hear some talk during campaigns about the fact that we've got hundreds of thousands of young men and increasingly young women who are coming back into our communities each and every day. And that if we don't do something about it, there is no way that we can overcome and rebuild our communities. There's no way that these men can be fathers effectively if they are not only imprisoned, but then placed under an economic death sentence for the rest of their lives. Well, I haven't just talked about these things. I've actually done it. When I was in the Illinois legislature, we passed laws to make it easier for ex-offenders to gain gainful employment and to become barbers and to become people who are able to work in various industries around the state. We know about voting rights, that our parents and our grandparents, they didn't march and they didn't submit themselves to fire hoses and imprisonment simply in order for us to have ordinary law-abiding citizens intimidated and deceived into not being able to vote. And that's why not only as a lawyer did I file suits on behalf of those who had been disenfranchised, but I also passed laws and have introduced laws right now in the United States Senate to make sure that we make those deceptive practices a felony throughout America. That we cannot have a situation in which people are being told that they cannot vote. So when I talk about these issues, these aren't issues that are new to me. These aren't issues that I just decided to start talking about as a presidential candidate. And I think it is important for everybody who is in this network to examine people's track records and make certain that they know that everybody's track record. And what I have said to Reverend Sharpton, and I will say here today, if there is somebody, I don't care whether they are white or black, whether they're male or female, if there is somebody who has been more on the forefront on behalf of the issues that you care about and has more concrete accomplishment on behalf of the things that you're concerned about, then I am happy to see you endorse them. I am happy to see you support them. But I am absolutely confident that you will not find that, because there is nobody who has stood fast on these issues more consistently each and every day than I have. That is something that I know. Now, let me say this. We know what the challenges that confront us are nationally. I already spoke about some of them. We got a healthcare system that's broken and bankrupting not just families but also our government. We've got an education system that, despite the sloganeering, is leaving too many children behind. They left the money behind for No Child Left Behind. And we are not preparing our young people in order to be able to compete in an international economy. We know that we've got the absence of an energy policy that leads us to send $800 million a day to some of the most hostile nations on earth. And that, in addition, also is melting the polar ice caps and changing the climate of the planet. And I know that that may not be something that we think is important on the south side of Chicago or in Harlem, except we should remember that typically when you have these forces like climate that shift, the people who are hurt are the poor. The people who endure famine are those in Africa that are most vulnerable. It is people who have the least that end up being impacted. We know that we've got an economy that has never been better in some places. You go down to Wall Street and take a look at some of those bonuses folks are racking up. That we've never seen higher productivity among our workers, that we are seeing enormous corporate profits. But everybody here knows what's happening among your neighbors and your friends, that the majority of families all across America are seeing a situation in which day in, day out, they are living paycheck to paycheck. That they're seeing their gas bill go up, they're seeing their electricity bill go up, they're seeing college tuition for their children go up, they're seeing gas prices at the pump go up, they're seeing their health care go up, but their salaries aren't going up. Their wages aren't going up. And so we understand that we've got an economy in which the burdens and the benefits of a global economy are not being spread evenly, and too many people are being left behind. And then we've got a war in Iraq, a war that should have never been authorized, a war that should have never been waged, a war that's costing us $500 billion, a war that's cost us over 33,000 lives and that has made us less safe, that has diminished our standing around the world. Remember what I said, don't just look at folks who talk the talk, ask who's walked the walk. In 2002, I stood in front of 3,000 people, Reverend, in Chicago, and I said this war is a bad idea, that it shouldn't be authorized, I did it when the war was popular. It's easier to talk about the war when it's unpopular. I talked about it when it was popular and said that this is the wrong course for America to take. And so we know what the challenges are, but ultimately what we also know is that despite all the talk, nothing's going to change unless we change our politics and unless we change what's happening in Washington. Unless we get over a small and a timid politics, a politics that's based on who's up and who's down, a politics that's based on slash and burn negative ads, instead of a politics that's bringing people together to actually solve problems. There is nothing that we can't accomplish if we're able to forge the kind of coalition that all of you are trying to forge. But we are not going to be able to do it if we run politics as usual. That is something that I'm absolutely convinced about. If you are waiting for somebody to get elected to the White House and save you, it will not happen. It is only going to happen because all of us, millions of voices, decide we are going to save ourselves, that we're going to pull together, that we're going to organize, that we're going to mobilize, that we're going to march, that we're going to talk about these issues in a meaningful way. And so let's talk about what we can accomplish. On health care, we know what we need to do. We know that if we provide preventive care so that children like my daughter who have asthma are getting regular checkups each and every day instead of having to go to the emergency room, then we will save money and that child will be healthy. We know that if we give every single person who's got a chronic disease the kind of care that they need, so that if somebody's got diabetes, that they're getting the medications they need each and every week, then we're not going to have to pay for the $30,000 foot amputation. We will save money. Those people will be better off. We can take that money and we can create a system in which every single American has affordable health care in this country. That is something that we have had enough talk about. Every 4 years somebody talks about universal health care and nothing happens. And the reason nothing happens is because the insurance companies and the drug companies are writing the health care bills, and that is why all of us here have to get organized and mobilized to make sure that by the end of the next president's first term, by the end of my first term, we have universal health care right here in America. We know what we've got to do in terms of education. We know that if we put $1 into early childhood education, then we get $7 back in reduced delinquency rates and reduced costs in terms of incarceration for our young people. We know that. And yet we still have millions of children who should qualify for Head Start that we haven't gotten enrolled in Head Start. There is no reason why we can't pay for that. If we can spend $275 million a day in Iraq, we can't find a little bit of money to make sure that we're investing in Head Start right here in America. We know that the single most important factor in terms of education are our teachers. And yet our teachers continue to be underpaid, disrespected. There is no reason why we should not have an entire new movement to recruit and train and retrain an entire generation of new teachers. We've got to pay them more, and we've got to give them more flexibility in the classroom, and we've got to come up with assessment tools that actually measure progress in the classroom. Teachers are happy to be held accountable if they are given the respect and the money and the tools that they need in order to educate every child and not just some children. We know that we can deal with the energy crisis. There's no reason why we can't increase fuel efficiency standards on cars. We have the technology right now. If we had 43 miles a gallon on every car in America, we would have to import zero oil from the Middle East. None. And if we had to import zero oil from the Middle East, Reverend, you know what would happen to our foreign policy. We might not be ending up sending hundreds of thousands of troops over the Middle East every time there's a problem. We know that in terms of our economy, we can boost the minimum wage, we can increase the earned income tax credit, we can lay down broadband lines, not just in downtown, but all across urban communities and in rural areas all across America so that they have access to the internet. And we can make sure that our children are able to afford a college education, which is why the first bill I introduced when I got to the United States Senate was increasing the Pell Grant levels so that every single one of our children can afford to go to college. Right now, 200,000 children don't go to college every year because they don't have the money to go. So the problem is not that we don't know how to solve our problems. The problem is that we have not set the right priorities. And the only way we're going to do that is to change our politics. And the only thing that is holding us back is that we don't have confidence that we can actually change things. And that is what is at stake in this election. It's also why this network is so important, because we're not going to be able to change politics unless we also do a little bit to change ourselves. You know, one of the things that I always say to people is that government can solve a lot of our problems, but government can't solve all our problems. And Reverend Sharpton has talked about that. You know, we were just talking in the back about what happened in terms of Don Imus and the nonsense that had been spoken on the radio. Now, we can have the FCC and others talk about how we enforce the various laws to restrict statements that are made, but the fact is we've got a First Amendment. What we have to do is make sure that all of us are not supporting the degradation of our women. That we're not, you know, I know that there's been a little contest between the rappers and Reverend Sharpton about what's appropriate and what's not. Let me say this. I haven't just singled out the rappers. I've said I've heard those words around the kitchen table in some homes. I hear them in the barber shop. I hear them on the basketball court. We all know that all of us have been complicit in diminishing ourselves and engaging in the kind of self-hatred that keeps our young women and our young men down.
That's right.
That's something that we've got to talk about in this election. What do we have to do? What kinds of responsibilities do all of us have? I am willing to fight to make sure that we change funding in education, because it doesn't make any sense that some schools get twice as much money per pupil as others. And that's a law that has to change across the nation. But I also know that it's not going to make a dime's bit of difference if we put more money in the schools if when children come home from school, we're not willing to turn off the television set and make sure that child sits down and does their homework. And we're meeting with our teachers. We've got responsibilities too. We know that our community has been redlined, that insurance companies and drug companies are not investing in our communities, and that's important. But I also know that we could transform our communities if we supported our local businesses.
That's right.
And if we kept, you know, one thing I always gets me mad, Reverend, when I'm driving through the south side of Chicago and I see folks throwing out garbage on the streets, along the commercial strips, that's something that we've got control over. Nobody wants to shop where there's 40-ounce bottle broken up. That's something that we've got to talk about. Most of all, something that I want to talk about during the course of this campaign is the responsibility of fathers to their children. You know, I've introduced a fatherhood initiative in the United States Senate that is going to provide more support for fathers so that they can support their children. But I also know, as somebody who grew up without a father in the house, that ultimately a government can't force a man to live up to his responsibilities. And that is something that we have to all take upon ourselves, and that's something that's got to be spoken about during the course of this campaign, to live up to his responsibilities. And that is something that we have to all take upon ourselves, and that's something that's got to be spoken about during the course of this campaign. So here's the upshot. You know, there's going to be a lot of talk during this campaign about what George Bush hasn't done. And we know what that list is. We know it's a long list. And there's going to be, every single candidate can lay out a greatest hits of how George Bush has failed America. We will talk about Katrina and how we had our fellow citizens standing on rooftops. We can talk about this disastrous war in Iraq and how, as a consequence of that war, not only have our young people suffered, but America's standing in the world has suffered and has to be transformed. We will talk about how the corruption in no-bid contracts have left billions of dollars unaccounted for, billions of dollars that could have been invested in schools and bridges and hospitals all across America. We can talk about those things, but ultimately, what I want to spend talking about is where we go from here. What kind of future can we paint for our children? Can we create an America in which all of us come together to make certain that every child has a decent shot in life, to make sure that folks aren't bankrupt because they got sick, to make sure that everybody can find a job that pays a living wage, to make sure that our senior citizens can retire with some dignity and some respect, to lead with our values and ideals. That's going to be just as important as talking about George Bush. You know, a while back, somebody came up to me and they said that they were so proud of my race, so proud of the campaign that I was running. And they said that, you know, their son, who was 13 years old, was for the first time paying attention to politics. And said that seeing me campaign had made that boy think differently about what was possible. And I understood what he was saying, and I understood it from the perspective of that boy. Some of you saw that I went down to Selma, Alabama for the 42nd anniversary of the March across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And it was a magnificent event celebrating John Lewis and all the others who had marched across that bridge, not knowing what to expect, being turned back by the horses and the billy clubs and the tear gas, and having to stagger back and regroup, and having themselves reminded by Dr. King that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, that we have to keep on striving for something better. And as I was there marching and standing on that bridge, and Reverend Sharpton was there, and others who had participated, I thought about how I had been inspired by those young people when I was a young person. I thought about how the reason I had ended up traveling to Chicago was because of the actions that they had taken. I thought about how each of us, generation after generation, pass on